OK, j'ouvre maintenant la réunion. Bienvenue à la réunion.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 124 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe.
And the motion adopted by the committee on February the 14th, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of online harms. Before we begin, I want to do the usual housekeeping, but mostly for the benefit of the people who are visitors. Please take the following preventative measures in place to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Only a black approved earpiece is supposed to be used. You could also try a black approved hairpiece if you like. The former gray hairpieces must no longer be used. Keep your earpiece away from all microphones at all times. When you're not using your earpiece, please place it on the decal in front of you, face down. Thanks for your cooperation. Please, you're not allowed to take pictures of the screen or what is going on here. It'll be posted publicly later on. And now, in accordance with the committee's routine motion, I think our clerk has already made sure that the witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Yes, thank you. And I want to make a few comments for the benefits of members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. Raise your hand if you're in the room, if you wish to speak. And if you're virtual, raise your virtual hand. Thank you very much. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Now, pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, for April the 9th, we have Claude Barreau, physiotherapist from Homewood Health, in the room with us today. During the meeting, should you feel distressed or uncomfortable due to the sensitive nature of the committee study, you can speak with Mr. Barreau, who is available to assist. Now, I'm sorry I called you a physiotherapist. You are a psychotherapist, Mr. Barrow. I'm sorry. I now want to welcome our witnesses. Our witnesses are Vivek Krishnamurthy, Associate Professor of Law, University of Colorado Law School. He's in by video conferencing. Emily Laidlaw, Associate Professor and Canada Research Chair in Cybersecurity Law, University of Calgary, by video conference. Amanda Todd, Legacy Society, Carol Todd, founder and mother, by video conference. Centre for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children, Diane Lalonde, Research and Knowledge Mobilization Specialist, by video conference. In the room, we have Connecting to Protect, Dr. Jocelyn Monsma-Selby, Chair, Clinical Therapist and Researcher specializing in forensic sexology and addiction, and the Sûreté du Québec, Marc-Antoine Vachon, Lieutenant. You each have five minutes. Yes, Monsieur.
Madame la Présidente, j'aimerais qu'on...
Sorry.
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, I'd like us to agree among the members of the committee, because we expect that the bell will ring in a few minutes for another vote. I just want to ensure that while the bells are ringing, if the opening remarks of our witnesses have not been completed, at the very least, we should complete these opening remarks, and we have time for a round of questions out of respect for our witnesses who are joining us and who have traveled here to be with us, that we give them as much as possible to our witnesses as part of the study, even though the bell might be ringing. I would simply like us to agree on that if we could.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. Is everyone in agreement? It's a reasonable request. Ms. Thomas?
I guess just to further define that, I wonder if there would be agreement around the table that we allow remarks and questions to continue until, I don't know, let's say 10 minutes before the vote or 5 minutes before the vote, if we're willing to vote virtually.
That's traditional, yes. Anyone disagreeing with that?
Not disagreeing, but if everyone's voting virtually from here, why can't we do it all vote and then get back to business? No, we can't according to the rules, right?
According to the rules, we have to wait until the vote is counted. We have
Yeah,
to wait
whatever
until the
is
vote is
good.
counted, Martin. I'm sorry, Michael. Michelle, yes, sorry. Yes, tell it.
Just to clarify, I think what Ms. Thomas is saying, and I think I would be okay with this, I think is that we do, if it's a 30-minute bells, that we do 20 minutes and then people can go vote, do what they need to do, and then we do as custom once the vote is counted.
There is an option, of course, for you not to go anywhere, but I can suspend and you can vote here, and then we can start. So that she's suggesting 5 or 10 minutes. Do you want 5 or 10 people? Can I get an okay on that? 10 or 5? Speak now, or I will make a decision and you may not like it. Pardon? 5? 5 is good. I think 5 is good since we're voting virtually. Because we cannot go back into business until, guys, one person speaking at a time, we cannot go back into business until the votes are counted and read. So we could cut short at the beginning, that's fine. So, right, that's how we're going to do it. Now, I've named those who are going to be presenting today. We've put them all into one presentation group as opposed to 2 separate groups, just again for time. And I want to apologize to the witnesses. Votes tend to do this. It disrupts committee a lot. And quite often, people who have come and are waiting to present find themselves unable to do so. But we're going to do that. And so you each have 5 minutes to present. And so we shall begin with Mr. Krishnamurthy. Mr. Krishnamurthy, begin for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very honored to be here, and I apologize in advance that I also have a hard deadline due to childcare obligations. Let me get right to it. I'm not an expert on the harms caused by what the committee is studying, that is with exposure to illegal explicit sexual content. So the focus of my remarks today will be on the technological means by which this kind of content is distributed and what can be done about it in compliance with the Charter. Just to frame my remarks, I think we can distinguish between 2 kinds of material. There's certain material that's per se illegal. So child sexual exploitation material is always illegal. But we face a challenge with material that's what I would call conditionally illegal. And I think non-consensual distribution of intimate imagery falls into this category because the illegality depends on whether the distribution is consensual or not, or the creation for that matter. So the challenge we face is in regulating the distribution of this content by means of distribution that are general purpose. So take a social media platform, whichever one you want, Instagram, TikTok. Take a messaging platform such as WhatsApp. The problem with regulating the distribution of this content on those platforms is that, of course, we use them for many positive purposes, but of course, they can be used for ill as well. So I'd like to pivot briefly to discuss the Online Harms Act, which is, of course, before Parliament right now, which I think offers a good approach to dealing with one part of the distribution challenge, which is with regard to social media platforms, right? These are platforms that take content generated by individuals and make them available to a large number of people. And I think that the framework of this law is quite sensible in that it creates a duty to act responsibly, which gets to the systemic problem of how platforms curate and moderate content. So the idea here is to reduce the risk that this kind of content does get distributed on these platforms. But the bill is, in my view, well designed in that there's also a duty to remove content, especially child sexual exploitation material and non-consensual distribution of intimate imagery, to the extent that platforms' own moderation efforts or user reports flag that content as being unlawful. So this is a very sensible approach that I think is very compliant with the Charter in its broad strokes. The challenge, however, is with the effectiveness of these laws. It's very hard to determine before the fact how effective these are because of issues with determining both the numerator and the denominator. And I don't want to take us too much into mathematical territory, but it's very hard for us to measure the prevalence of this content online or on any given platform. It's just hard to identify, in part because the legality or not of the content depends on the conditions in which it's distributed. And then on the numerator, which is how well are the platforms doing a job of getting it off. Again, we have issues with sort of identifying what's in and what's out. So this is a step forward. But the bill has limitations. And one way of understanding the limitations is with an analogy that a friend of mine, Peter Swire, who teaches at Georgia Tech, calls the problem of elephants and mice. So there are some elephants in the room, which are large, powerful, and visible actors. These are your Metas, your TikToks, or even a company like Pornhub, which has a very large and significant presence. These are players that can't hide from the law. But what is difficult in this space is that there are many mice. Mice are small, they're furtive, and they reproduce very quickly. They move around in darkness. This law is going to be very difficult to implement with regard to those kinds of actors, the ones that we find on the darker corners of the internet. So again, I think C63 is a very...
Sorry. Please. You have 26 seconds to wrap up.
Very well. The only thing I will say to conclude is that C63 does not deal with messaging software, things like WhatsApp, which are a primary vector by which this kind of content moves. I think that is a good call because of the difficulty in doing so. It's something that requires further study and a lot of work and a lot of thought on dealing with that particular piece of the distribution problem. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members.
Thank you very much. To the next person, who is Ms. Laidlaw, Emily Laidlaw. But before I do, I will give you a 30-second shout out so you can start to wrap up. And you can elaborate during the question and answer period if you miss some of your presentation. Thank you. Ms. Laidlaw, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. With my time, I'm going to focus on social media regulation and focus on Bill C63 and S210. Social media has historically been lightly regulated, so online safety has only been addressed if they felt like it or were pressured by the market. There have been some innovative solutions, and we need them to continue to innovate, but safety has generally taken a backseat to other interests. Social media have also privately set rules for freedom of expression, privacy, children's rights. There are no minimum standards and no way to hold companies accountable. That is changing globally. Many jurisdictions have passed online harms legislation, and the Online Harms Act, part of Bill C63, aligns with global approaches. So in my view, with tweaks, Bill C63 is the #1 avenue to address illegal sexually explicit content and sexual exploitation. Bill S210 would mandate age verification to access sites with sexually explicit material. It is a flawed bill, yes, but more importantly, it is unnecessary for 2 reasons. First, age verification is the crucial next frontier of online safety, but it is about more than sexually explicit material and about child safety broadly. The technology is evolving, and if we are committed to freedom of expression, privacy, and cybersecurity, how this technology is used must be scrutinized closely. Second, age verification is only one tool in the toolbox, so a holistic approach is needed where safety is considered in product design, content moderation systems, and the algorithms. So let me give you a few examples of safety by design where it does not involve age verification. 1, child luring and sextortion rates are rising. So what steps could social media take? Flag unusual friend requests from strangers, distant locations, remove network expansion prompts where friends are recommended based on location and interests, provide easy-to-use complaints mechanism, provide user empowerment tools like blocking accounts. Non-disclosure non-consensual disclosure of intimate images, child sexual abuse material. This requires immediate action. Does the social media service offer quick takedown mechanisms? Do they follow through with it? Do they flag synthetic media like deepfakes? How usable are the complaints mechanisms? For example, Discord has been used to live stream child sexual exploitation content. The Australian e-Safety Commissioner reported that Discord does not enable in-service reporting of live streamed abuse. This is an easy fix. And the last example is the Canadian Child Protection Centre offers a tool to industry, Project Arachnid, to proactively detect child sexual abuse material. Should social media be using this to detect and remove content? In my view, Bill C-63, again with tweaks, is the best avenue to address sexual exploitation generally. And so I think that the focus should be on how to improve that bill. There are many reasons for that. I'll give two here. One, the bill imposes 3 different types of responsibility. Vivek discussed this. Notably, the strongest obligation is the power for the commissioner to order removal of child sexual abuse content and non-disclosure of intimate images. This recognizes the need for swift removal of the worst kind of content. Second, all of this would be overseen by a digital safety commission, ombudsperson in office. Courts are never going to be fast to resolve the kinds of disputes here, and they're costly. So the power of the commissioner to order removal of the worst forms of content is crucial to provide access to justice. Courts are just ill-suited to oversee safety by design as well, which is necessarily an iterative process between the commission and companies. The tech evolves, so does the harm and the solutions. And with my remaining time, I want to flag one challenge before I close, and Vivek mentioned it as well, and that is private messaging. Bill C-63 does not tackle private messaging. This is a logical decision, otherwise it opens a can of worms.
30 seconds.
But many of the harms explored here happen on private messaging. So the key here is not to undermine privacy and cybersecurity protections. One way to bring private messaging into the bill and avoid undermining these protections is to impose safety obligations on the things that surround private messaging. Many I've mentioned, complaints mechanisms, suspicious friend requests, and so on. Thank you for your time. I welcome questions.
Thank you very much. And now I go to Ms. Amanda Todd, Legacy Society. Carol Todd. Carol? For 5 minutes, please.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can see you and hear you.
Okay,
Start.
that's good. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to speak. It's an honor to be able to share knowledge. I'm not coming as a researcher or someone who has, I guess, studied this. I'm coming as a mom. And I'm coming as a parent and as an educator with lived experience. And so confining my conversation to 5 minutes was difficult. And so I've written some notes so that I will read until my time is up. And I do welcome questions at the end. I have spent the last 12 years, I guess, looking at learning about sexual exploitation and online behaviors, that it is really hard to imagine the horrid things that are happening out there to our children. And as a side note, I believe that Bill C-63 needs to be passed with some tweaks, because it is the safety net for our children and our Canadians online. This subject holds significant importance and warrants ongoing dialogue to tackle not just the ease of access to such material, but also the profound harm that can be inflicted upon those who encounter sexually explicit content every day. I am Carol Todd, widely known as Amanda Todd's mother. In addition, I am an educator in a British Columbia school district, with my work primarily centered on digital literacy, online safety, and child abuse prevention, with a focus on exploitation and sextortion. Empowering student, teachers, and families with the knowledge and skills to navigate the digital world safely is essential, important, and now a passion of mine. I will continue to talk about how we can keep families and children safe forever, because this is what we needed for my daughter, and it became a bit too late. Amanda tragically took her life on October 10th, 2012, following extensive online exploitation, tormented harassment, and cyber abuse. Her story very much relates to what happens when there is creation, possession, and distribution of sexually explicit material online, and how easily others can access it as it becomes embedded online forever. Amanda's story garnered global attention after her tragic death. To reclaim her voice while she was alive, Amanda created a video that she shared on YouTube 5 weeks before her passing, and it has been viewed 50 million times worldwide and is now used as a learning tool for others to start the discussion and for students to learn more about what happened to her and why it's so important that we continue to talk about online safety, exploitation, and sextortion. As another side note, it has taken forever for us to catch up on the conversation of exploitation and sextortion. It was something that no one was able to talk about 12 years ago in 2012. It has evolved because of the increase of exploitation and sextortion online, not only happening to young girls, young boys, young adults, but men and women. The nefarious offenders online, because they've gotten away with it, because there's so many levels of the internet these days, have just increased in numbers and have caused much trauma, much harm, as this is a form of abuse and violence. Over the past decade, we've observed rapid changes in the technology landscape. Technology primarily used to be used as a communication tool for email, and now we have seen the evolvement of applications for fun. They were exuded as safe, but now we know differently because they have increased the chaos, concern, and undesirable behaviors online for our Canadians and for all. This isn't just a Canadian problem, it's a global problem. And I have watched other countries create legislation and laws, safety commissions, just as Canada with Bill C-63 now wants an e-safety commission board to oversee. I think that this is a brilliant idea. And for anyone here that gets to vote, I hope that it does pass. The prevalence of sexually explicit material has markedly
Can
increased due to...
you wrap up, please, Ms. Todd?
Yes.
Can I
Thank
make
you.
a suggestion, Chair, that we extend the witness's testimony? Just give her 2 more minutes, 3 more minutes, if that's okay with everyone. Thank you.
Yes, all right. I see the lights flashing, so the buzzer started. The committee wishes to give you 2 more minutes, Ms. Todd.
Thank you. The prevalence of sexually explicit material has increased due to the widespread use of the internet, and it manifests in various forms, including visual representations, photos, videos, films, written content, audio recordings, print material, and the volume grows exponentially day by day. The protection that we have for our children and for our adults isn't there on the internet, and big tech companies need to take responsibility. And I know that throughout the world now, there is more and more lawsuits. Big tech companies are being held responsible. So when accessing sexually explicit material, some of the challenges that we are faced with includes access to violent and explicit content that can impact sexual attitudes and behaviors, the harm to children through the creation, sharing, and viewing of sexual abuse material, increased violence against women and girls, as well as sex trafficking. It can also influence men's views on women and relationships. In my notes, I comment that we stereotype often that it is men that are violating others, but the offenders can be men and they can be women. They can also be other children, peer violence to peer violence. And so there is no one set rule on who is creating, who is causing, but we know that those who become traumatized and become victimized can be anyone. So what more needs to be done? And I'll just go through this quickly. As an educator, I feel I guess I feel strongly that increasing education is crucial, and the awareness and education needs to go to our
20
children
seconds.
and our young adults and to our families. We need stronger regulations and laws. Bill C-63 is one of them, and I know in the province of BC, more legislation has been passed and is done. We need to improve our online platforms and make them accountable. We need to increase parental controls and the monitoring, and we need to encourage reporting, and we also need to promote positive online behaviors. And so social emotional learning and social responsibility is part of the awareness and the education that needs to come on. So we need to be a voice, we need to stand up, and we also need to do more. And so thank you for the time, and I encourage questions so that I can finish reading my notes.
Thank you, Ms. Todd. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I just have a brief?
The bells are going, I think.
We're going till 5. We already agreed till 5 minutes.
Excuse me, I'm speaking, Mr. Lawrence. I just said the bells are going, so I need to know, check how much time we have to go before we get to our 5-minute time that we're going to give before we vote. Now, Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to commend all the witnesses for being here. And I'm just wondering if, given their courage and their unbelievable testimony that they're bringing, is there any way we could extend to 7 tonight there? So.
I don't think we have the resources to go beyond 6:30. I'm sorry. I was told that at the beginning of the meeting by the thing. Yes, excuse me, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. If you could just check with the clerk. My understanding is that we have resources that actually could take us potentially to 8 o'clock.
I'm sorry, I was told by the powers that be that we only have till 6:30 as a hard stop.
The clerk, that would be great.
Yes, clerk, we have till 6:30 as a hard stop. Can you speak up?
So this hard stop we were given was 6:30. However, if the committee wishes, I can request additional time. I can't guarantee will be accepted, but we can ask the resources if they do have availability.
Thank you. So we are, how many minutes do we have before the vote? Somebody keeping track? So I can't read that from the 24 minutes. All right, so we will go for another 20 minutes. So I will go to Diane Lalonde of Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children for 5 minutes, please, Ms. Lalonde.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me into this space. My perspective is informed by my work in the gender-based violence sector with survivors. And my focus in my minutes that I have is the need for a gender-based analysis when we're talking about online harms and legislation. And specifically, I'm going to focus on 2 online harms: the non-consensual distribution of intimate images that I refer to as naked, and then also deepfake sexual abuse. Although I'm happy to speak more to further forms that haven't been necessarily brought forth as much, such as cyber flashing. So each of these forms of violence are increasing in the Canadian context. They target marginalized individuals, and they produce gendered and intersectional harms. And so when we're talking about the non-consensual distribution of intimate images, violence occurs when individuals have their content taken from even their computers that were private, but also posted online. And people do so for a variety of motivations, many of which link into other forms of violence. And so they do so to control, monitor, and harass their current or past intimate partner. As well, we see especially young boys doing so because of social pressures they face relating to traditional masculinity and expectations around sexual experience, that they should have this experience, they should be promoting it. And we've also seen naked used as a tactic to advertise, recruit, and maintain control over individuals who experience sex trafficking. And naked does disproportionately target women. And so out of the 295 Canadian cases of NICID reported to police by adults in 2016, 92% were reported by women. Police reported incidents from 2015 to 2020 by youth 12 to 17 found girls again overrepresented as targets at 86% in comparison to boys at 11%. And unfortunately, we are lacking intersectional Canadian data, but if we look at national studies in America and Australia, they share that NICID also disproportionately targets Black, Indigenous, 2S LGBTQ2IA+ individuals and people with disabilities. And we see very much the same targeting when we're talking about deepfake sexual abuse. Many of these forms of applications and technology only work on women and girls' bodies. A study of 95,000 deepfake videos in 2023 found that 98% were sexually explicit, and of those, 99% targeted women. And so when we're talking about the impacts, as you can imagine, they're vast. They are emotional, economic, physical, and social. Survivors have likened these forms of violence to additional forms of sexual violence, wherein their autonomy is denied. They've also shared one thing that's distinct about online harms is the way in which the harm becomes crowdsourced and people are sharing this violence experienced. And technology facilitated violence impacts different groups in qualitatively specific and intersecting ways. And so, for instance, sexual double standards result in women in comparison to man being more likely to be blamed, discredited, and stigmatized due to sexual imagery online. 2S LGBTQ2IA+ individuals have identified that NICID has been a tool to out their sexual orientation and their gender identity. And finally, deepfake sexual abuse also impacts sex workers, especially women in sex workers who have their likeness stolen and used to inflict violence, and who then face stigma and criminalization in response. So in terms of ways to address this harm, I think much of the focus on legislation has been on regulation and removal of content, and that is absolutely essential. We also need to recognize the people that this is impacting, the survivors, and who survivors are going to. They're going to gender-based violence services in order to cope and heal from these harms. And so an added dimension when we're talking about addressing online harms is making sure we're supporting the gender-based violence agencies who are doing the work to support survivors who already have robust sex education programs. And some of this work is as well outlined in the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence. And I as well want to echo Carol Tallett's remarks about the importance of consent-based education, especially when we're talking about something like deepfake. Thank you. Deepfake sexual abuse. Sometimes there's not an understanding of it as a form of harm. And so we need to have education in schools, in society that is sex positive and trauma informed to share that this is a form of violence and also to fight against victim blaming. Thank you.
You can elaborate, as I said to all witnesses, during the Q&A period. Thanks. We now go to Dr. Selby. For 5 minutes, please, Dr. Selby.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My submission to you comes from 43 years of clinical practice and research and the chairing of Connecting to Protect's Global Summit in 2022, involving 23 countries addressing the harms from children accessing pornography online. My experience links me directly to the consequences of childhood access to online pornography, resulting in problematic sexual behavior, including difficulties in conducting relationships, destruction of the family, and in more extreme cases, criminal behavior. Access to pornography by children who are unable to process and understand the material is like a gateway drug, setting up future abuse and all the attendant consequences. For the last 13 years, I've treated individuals with compulsive sexual behavior disorder and individuals who've been accessing child sexual exploitation material online. We are facing a global epidemic of online child sexual abuse and exploitation from unregulated access to the internet. We're getting it wrong, and we're missing the mark in protecting children. My colleague and I have outlined in detail what we consider the proposed solution in our brief for Bill S210. We simply advocate shifting the narrative from the focus on age verification to a broader consideration of age assurance options in conjunction with device-level controls, operating at the point of online access, Google, Apple, Microsoft. This approach is technologically possible and relatively quick to implement with far greater reach and effectiveness. Device levels controls coupled with a multi-dimensional public health approach is needed, including the implementation of protective legislation and policy. Sadly, sexual exploitation is happening right now in Canada, feeding the production of illegal sexually explicit material online. Cybertip.ca receives millions of reports of child sexual exploitation material yearly. 39% of luring attempts reported to cybertip.ca in the last several years involve victims under 13 years of age. Globally, from 2020 to 2022, We Protect's global assessment, and I hope you're really sitting down for this, found a 360% increase in self-generated sexual imagery of 7 to 10-year-olds. How does this happen? It is wrong on so many levels. Not a child protection expert on the planet agrees that this is okay. It's really child sexual abuse via digital images. The harms to children from accessing legal and illegal sexually explicit material online include trauma, exploitation, self-produced sexual images, child-on-child abuse, objectification, violence, and risky sexual behaviors, depression, difficulties in forming and maintaining close relationships, anxiety disorder, panic attacks, PTSD, and complex PTSD symptoms, among other potential health issues, and addiction carry on into adulthood, causing documented long-term mental health consequences that impact personal and family relationships and the very fabric of our society unless there is early identification of the problem and treatment. You might be wondering, how are certain individuals vulnerable to developing a problem like this or a compulsive sexual behavior disorder? It almost always involves early access to legal sexually explicit material online at an early age.
30
The average
seconds.
age of exposure is 12 years old. I want to talk to you about the erototoxic implications of sexually explicit material online. And we know that we need
Dr.
to do
Selby,
something.
you only have 16 seconds left.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. When you get the question and answer, you can expand on some of the things you want to see. I'm sorry, we have a time certain here with votes. Philip, Ms. Thomas suggested 5 minutes before the vote. We have time for Ms. Selby to finish and one more person so we get all our witnesses done before we vote. I'm sorry, Ms. Dr. Selby.
Point of order, Madam Chair, point of order. We actually don't. We have until 39, do we not? Should use
We
three more
have
minutes.
13 minutes and 81 and 29 seconds before we vote, which leaves us room for one 5-minute presenter. That's our last witness, and then our 5 minutes before we vote. Thank you. Okay, go. Sorry, Dr. Selby, I'm very sorry, but you will have a chance to elaborate during the question times. I'm going to now go to Marc-Antoine Vachon.
Well,
Sorry?
no, you just robbed her of her last 30
The last
seconds. Please give that
12
back to the
seconds, all
witness.
right?
No,
okay.
30 seconds because you continuously interrupted
I am
her.
here to keep the time, but go ahead. You have 13 seconds, Dr. Selby.
When I began training in this area, common wisdom said that it would take 15 to 20 years from accessing problematic content, sexual content on the internet, before individuals realize they have a problem. I'm now seeing 17 to 19-year-olds in treatment. I'm an independent third-party voice and do not receive compensation from any organization, including the adult industry, for my work in advocating for the protection of children. Thank you for hearing me out today.
Thank you, Dr. Selby. I have to keep to the time we have decided on as a committee. And so we have Marc-Antoine Vachon, Lieutenant, Sûreté du Québec. Monsieur Vachon?
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to begin by greeting all the members of the committee and thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you today. My name is Marc-Antoine Vachon, head of the Child Sexual Exploitation Investigations Unit at the Sûreté du Québec since 2020. And before that, I devoted most of my career to fighting against sex crimes, and I've been doing this since 2006. Sexual violence, particularly when the crime targets a minor, remains a major concern for the public, police organizations, and governments alike. Unfortunately, we realize that the number of reports of child pornography is continually on the rise. Since 2019, the number of reports has risen by 295%, going from 1,137 to 4,493. Police organizations must continually adapt to the changing behaviors of child pornography consumers, as well as to constantly evolving technologies. As a provincial police force, the Sûreté du Québec is responsible for, among other things, coordinating investigations into sexual crimes committed against children and on the internet using electronic equipment, including pornography, sextortion, and luring. Combating sexual violence has been one of our top priorities for many years. To this end, since 2012, the Sûreté has been pursuing its provincial strategy to combat the sexual exploitation of children on the internet, which focuses on prevention, technology training, enforcement, and coordination. Over the past 5 years, we have been able to enhance the structure thanks to additional funding from the federal and provincial governments. In concrete terms, 3 teams of specialized investigators and a coordination team are specifically dedicated to countering this phenomenon by ensuring that they process reports received, conducting and coordinating province-wide investigations involving sexual predators and consumers of child pornography, partnering with whistleblower agencies such as CyberTape or CyberAid and the National Child Exploitation Center, providing operational expertise to various internal and external callers, including municipal police forces and the Directorate for Criminal and Penal Prosecutions. Identify and stop networks of predators distributing child pornography. Detect, through various investigative techniques, individuals who produce and make available child pornography. The establishment of the Integrated Child Pornography Enforcement Team, ICET, in October 2021 will contribute to greater effectiveness in the fight against sexual exploitation of children on the internet. This team, comprised of members from the Sûreté and police services of Montréal, Quebec City, Longueuil, Laval, and Gatineau, conducts joint operations primarily targeting producers, distributors of child pornography. In the fall of 2023, this team coordinated an interprovincial operation with Ontario and New Brunswick as part of a project, Projet Respecté, and to complete the project's various investigations, primarily aimed at identifying child pornography distributors, and 470 police officers from 31 police organizations were required. The coordination achieved by the Sûreté du Québec enables us to strengthen our capacity for action in the fight against the sexual exploitation of children on the internet, to unite police efforts against a global problem, to optimize the handling of cases involving potential child exploitation, identifying a greater number of online sexual predators, increasing the number of arrests, and of course, preventing potential victims. The Sûreté du Québec is actively working to combat the access, production, distribution, and possession of child pornography content with the aim of protecting the most vulnerable and bringing sexual predators to book. Since 2019, our efforts have resulted in the arrest of 1,100 criminals, individuals, and the identification of over 230 victims across the Quebec province. I would like to emphasize that the fight against sexual exploitation of children on the internet is possible thanks to the participation and collaboration of all players and partners who care about and act for the well-being of victims, both police officers and citizens. And they are invited to report all situations of child sexual abuse to police officers. Thank you, and we look forward to talking with you during the question period.
Thank you very much. We now have 7 minutes and 14 seconds before the vote, so I will suspend. That comes as close to the 5 minutes as we can get. So I will suspend, and we will try to get the House online for you to look at what's going on in the House. Suspend. report back to you on your request that she find out about resources.
So our partners have confirmed that should the committee wish, we do have resources available until 7 p.m.
I shall now begin. Yes, Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah, just a quick comment there. We'll wait for Talib to come back before, if it were to go to vote, but I'm hoping we don't have to do that. The block had, Monsieur Shampoo had a brilliant suggestion that we just allow for enough time to do one full round, which would take us a little bit between 6:30 and 7. But we can maybe discuss, we'll go ahead and then we can discuss it as we go.
Should we just...
So we'll go with the 6-minute round. So I begin with Ms. Thomas for the Conservatives.
Wait,
Madame la
let's,
6
minutes,
I'm
please.
sorry.
Sorry,
Point of
sorry.
order.
Juste une petite précision, Madame la Présidente. Oui, tout à fait, je suis tout à fait d'accord pour qu'on commence et qu'on fasse une ronde de questions et commentaires complètes. Mais on commence un peu plus tôt que ce que j'avais anticipé. Alors, si au terme de cette ronde...
Working.
I don't
Switch to
think there
French.
is any interpretation. There's no interpretation. Can you please?
Okay, sorry, the interpretation is on. The interpretation is on.
Sorry, Martin, you'll have to repeat yourself.
Sorry to interrupt you. It
And
wasn't in
Michael
English.
will have to stop speaking because we're going to.
They're like, I couldn't hear what he was saying.
Martin have the floor. What if you were listening, you would hear that I asked for interpretation, and he can repeat himself. I'm waiting for interpretation.
The interpreter is here.
Begin again.
Alors, Madame la Présidente, comme
So, Madam Chair, as was mentioned by my colleague, Mr. Lawrence, yes, I agree with doing a full round, but if we can start the questions, we're starting earlier than what I had anticipated. So as a result, I propose that we do a first round, and after that, if there's time left, I am open to spreading around the time between the parties for a second round. There you are.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas?
Officially move a motion that we sit until 7 p.m. It's a non-dilatory motion, and so it needs to go to a vote.
We have a vote. Mr.
Yeah,
Coteau?
Madam Chair.
We have a motion on the floor.
So
Point of order. Point of order. Point of order.
It's not debatable, Michael.
No, but, okay, point of order.
No, it's a point of order.
Point of order.
Yes,
If
go
she's
ahead
doing
with
a
your
point
point
of
of
order, then I
order,
can do one
Ms.
too.
No.
So,
Madam Chair, I'm
so
sorry.
We've always worked off of consensus on timing. We can't go past 6:30. There are folks who have commitments, and it's impossible for us to do so.
I'm sorry. That wasn't a point of order.
Motion
So
to
now
suspend.
let's go to the vote, please. Clerk, go ahead with the vote. Call it.
The vote is on the motion of Ms. Thomas to sit until 7 p.m. Just checking to see if Mr. Noor Mohammed has joined.
Here is it. So first of all, we just had an agreement that we wouldn't move any votes until my colleague came back. Mr. Lawrence clearly said that. And number two, I've always been under the impression that we had to have a consensus in order to move forward with an extension of time. That's been the rules that we've always worked from, and I don't think it's fair to accept this motion.
Just a point of order.
Because it's out of...
This is dilatory. There's no choice.
There is no
The
such...
Conservatives were the ones who actually said, let's not make any votes until we can accommodate...
I am sorry, Michael, you're debating the motion to go till 7. Let's call the vote. It's a not debatable motion. Call the vote, please, Chair. Mr. Noor Mohammed, is he virtual? Can he vote? There he is. He can vote.
No.
Go ahead.
No.
Begin.
No.
So, Mr. Noor Mohammed, the vote is on the motion from MP Thomas to sit until 7 p.m.
No.
That's me. Sorry. Mr. Coteau.
No.
Ms. Dillon.
No.
Ms. Gainey. Madame Latanzio.
No.
Mr. Wall.
Yes.
Ms. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Gould.
Oui.
Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Shampoo.
Oui.
Ms. Ashton.
Yes.
Yeas pour 6-6, nays contre 5-5.
The vote to sit until 7 has passed. Yes, Mr. Cotto?
So now I can bring up my point I was trying to bring up earlier. Hasn't it always been, I would say, the agreement in this committee to have unanimous consent in order to extend time? I remember that as clear as day. That's the way we've done things.
No, that's not the way. I'm sorry, we just can't debate
So
it. That's all. We have to call the
just so
vote.
we're all clear on the record, from now on, to extend or to move times is just based on the majority. That's all.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
thank you. All right, so Mr. New Mohammed, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with Mr. Koto. My recollection is that we have on many different occasions sought unanimous consent to sit beyond an allocated time. And to do this now on a per vote basis, I think is certainly disappointing, given that I know there are at least four members that had other commitments, important ones, equal, not that this is not important, this is incredibly important. But to put members in a situation
Mr. New Mohammed,
like
your
this is
microphone.
not been the practice, and I'm disappointed to see that we're doing this.
Mr. New Mohammed, the interpreters cannot hear you. I'm sorry. So can you turn your microphone on again if you're going to speak? And I just want to point out that the more we talk, the less time we have for questions. Go ahead, Mr. Nur Mohammed. Can you turn on your microphone?
My microphone is on. Can the interpreters not hear me?
An okay from the interpreters, just a second. We can go ahead, Mr. Nur Mohammed. You may repeat what you said.
My point is very simply that this is an incredibly important conversation, and we have members that want to participate in this, but also have other commitments that will begin after this meeting. And it's disappointing that we are changing what has been prevailing practice to now move to a vote for something that could have been done through unanimous consent and or with a different solution. So it is disappointing that's how we've just decided to make this decision now.
Thank you, Mr. Nur Mohammed. Are you challenging the chair?
No, I am just making a point.
Good. Well, I did make the ruling and he's challenging it, but okay. Now let's, we now start the questions. The first round, beginning with the Conservatives. For 6 minutes, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the witnesses for your patience today. My first question goes to Ms. Lalonde. In an article that you recently wrote with regards to Bill C-63, you said it contains, and I'll quote directly, it contains glaring gaps that risk leaving women and girls in Canada unfairly exposed. I'm wondering if you can expand on those gaps that you see within the legislation that would perhaps leave women and children vulnerable.
Yes, for sure. In my mind, it's around the support for survivors and how we build that in. And so I know there's talk of the Safety Commission, the ombudsperson, unless they have a mandate to support survivors, which would be new, and they'd have to build relationships with that community. What we need is to have support for the gender-based violence sector to continue uplifting survivors and promoting healing opportunities. And I think of that especially because the legislation talks so much about regulation, which would require survivors to be the ones who report the violence that they're experiencing. And so how do we even get to know about the violence unless we're supporting survivors to report it and to heal from it?
Thank you. So certainly a need to be survivor-centric. I guess I'm further concerned, though, with regards to this legislation. To your point, it sets up a Digital Safety Commission and a Digital Safety Ombudsman, which essentially allows individuals to issue or file a complaint or a concern with these folks. And then, of course, the commission or the ombudsman has the authority then to issue fines and to evaluate how platforms, are functioning. But in terms of actual teeth, deep fakes are a real thing, as has been mentioned, and there is no change to the criminal code in terms of making it criminal to create and distribute intimate deep fakes online. I guess I'm curious if this would be something that would be worth the government pursuing on behalf of Canadians and ensuring that vulnerable individuals are better cared for.
Yes, thank you. And we've certainly seen success in the UK in terms of them criminalizing distribution, and so that does remain important. One of the biggest websites of deepfake sexual abuse was taken down in the UK after that decision was made. And I think the creation piece is another one where we could stop the violence early on and people realize the ramifications before they start. And so that's another avenue that could certainly be explored.
In your estimation, like, should that be an expansion of the criminal code to include intimate deepfakes or the abuse that transpires based on those?
Yes, I think so. I think that more than anything, it signals this as a form of violence, given how much it is doubted. And so the study that I mentioned, where they, in 2023, assessed 95,000 different deepfake sexual abuse videos. They also asked people, like, do you feel guilty watching these? And overwhelmingly, people said no. And so there needs to be a signaling of this as a form of violence and recognition of that. In addition to that, I do think a lot of it, criminalization is important, but it's also the education, especially with youth. And we're seeing young people increasingly use this technology around how it could be harmful in a way that doesn't perhaps immediately go to concerns about criminalization and shame, and but in a way that promotes sex positivity and sexual expression, but shares how harms could be produced.
Yeah. One of the things that you also have stated with regards to this bill is that you said that technology-facilitated violence that Canadians have been increasingly experiencing does not impact everyone in the same way and at the same rates. So you're tapping into this idea that there is this technology-facilitated violence. How could that be better addressed through legislation?
I think, so for instance, even when we're talking about a digital safety commission, it's talking about raising digital awareness. It's also getting to the root causes. And so, yes, we need to talk about digital literacy, but we also need to talk about misogyny. We need to talk about gender equity. These are all very interconnected issues, especially when we're talking about these forms of violence that so disproportionately target women and girls.
Okay. Thank you. I take your point for sure. My next question is for Dr. Selby. I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit maybe about platforms. So you touched on this a little bit in your opening remarks, just in terms of strategies around how platforms function and the vulnerabilities that are created for children online. What could be done from a legislative standpoint? So I understand that there's a lot of education for sure, but in this room we're legislators. So what could be done on that level in order to protect children on those platforms?
So
there are 30 seconds left.
Children are finding sexually explicit content, illegal content on many platforms, Wikipedia, you name it, TikTok. It's just fascinating where they're finding this material. So the importance of a device level control with an age assurance technology is the only answer, because you're not just finding this material on porn sites. It's everywhere. It'll blow your mind the places that you can find it.
Thank you.
What mechanisms could be put in place?
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Thank you very much. I just wanted to committee that Mr. Krishnamurthy is back. If you wish to question him, he had left, but he's come back. Person is Patricia Latanzio for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and glad that Mr. Krishnamurthy is back, because I'd like to address him the following question. I'd like to thank everybody for being here today to the witness. There's no question that everyone present here and engaged in this important discussion in other forms, both nationally and abroad, wants one outcome, and perhaps above all others, and that is to ensure that children are interacting free from threat or violation when online. Also, I think that we all agree on the importance of outlining and establishing safety standards to see that this is achieved. The issue, however, seems that it's not just in the what, but in the how. So on the issue of mandatory age verification technology, and as we know it's still in the early stages, not just in its refinement, but also in its conception. It's also important, it's an important element of the conversation, but has been tried and failed in multiple US states, such as Louisiana, Utah, and Texas. As you likely know, VPNs, or virtually private networks, exist as a means of circumventing both the age restriction controls for children and the means of tracking offenders. This is an important nuance to consider. These tools can significantly hamper the utility of existing age verification technology as they relate to offenders and victims. So here is the question: how does the age-appropriate design and language seek to address these issues and improve the safety standards for children?
Thank you very much for that question, which is a difficult one to answer, but let me try my best to speak to some of the points that you raised. I'm intimately familiar with the age verification laws that have been enacted in the United States and some other jurisdictions. And my view is that these laws are ineffective not just because of the technological points that you raised in the question, but also we have a fundamental problem, which is that this technology is not mature and that it poses many risks to the privacy and cybersecurity of individuals who are using the internet. So this is a solution that, as technology develops, may be better. And this is why I believe that the Senate bill is ill-considered at this time. As to age-appropriate design as a different concept, the idea of age-appropriate design is that websites or other online services that cater to children or that are likely to have young people as users must incorporate by design various kinds of protections to ensure that they are used in an appropriate manner or that they are protected from misuse. And I think this is a very important set of interventions that gets to the previous discussion that was had with Ms. Thomas, which is regarding the prevalence of this kind of harmful content in many parts of the internet. So the idea here is, again, to reduce the prevalence of that content by making sure that sites that appeal to children or that are likely to be used by children have measures in place to keep them safe. I think the larger point that I'd like to make here is that this is a very complex set of problems that has no single legislative or technological solution. We're going to need different points of intervention that regulate different kinds of players in the technology ecosystem, as well as people who use technology, if we're going to effectively deal with the problem. And I also think that it's important to understand that we're never going to achieve a 100% solution to any of these problems. The problem of sexual exploitation of children or of the circulation of unlawful intimate imagery certainly predates the internet. It will probably postdate the internet in terms of what technology comes next. So what we should be looking for is solutions that are significantly effective in reducing the prevalence of this content and the harm that it causes.
Okay. My next question is addressed to Ms. Laidlaw. Bill C-63 was developed to ensure compliance with all existing privacy laws and global best practices. Do you have any concerns related to the privacy implications of S-210, and how do we ensure privacy is upheld in the development of online safety regulations?
Would you like to redirect that, Patricia? Ms. Laidlaw is no longer here. Can we hold?
Sure. So can I address that same question to Mr. Krishna Murphy?
Yes, I would be happy to answer. I would not speak for Ms. Laidlaw. However, we are friends and colleagues. So specifically on age verification, the problem with age verification technology as currently designed, there's a couple of problems. The first is that almost every age verification method that is currently used has it either requires you to divulge personal details, which means that your internet activities are being tracked by somebody in some way. And there are some computational efforts to reduce that, but it is a first order problem with the technology. Another set of approaches uses biometrics, for example, the shape of your face or certain characteristics to try to determine what your age is. And those suffer from significant inaccuracies. And also they collect a very sensitive form of information, or at least they process it, which is biometric data. So there is research underway that seeks to implement age verification in a way that causes fewer privacy harms. But as far as I know, we're not there yet on developing that technology. So again, this is an area where there's a lot of innovation spurred by legislation, but I would caution against this approach.
Thank you. The time is up, Ms. Fortanzio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now go to Mr. Shampoo. 6 minutes, please, Martin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je veux,
Thank you, Chair. In turn, I wish to sincerely thank the witnesses for their patience. Indeed, sometimes the ups and downs of Parliament mean that we have some delays, such as we saw today due to the vote. So thank you to the witnesses for your patience. I would like to talk with Lieutenant Vachon. In your opening remarks, you talked about an increase since 2019 of 295% in terms of cases reported, which are staggering figures. Reassure me, please, is there some part of that increase which is, I don't want to say positive, but is simply due to a greater awareness that we've built that resulted in more people deciding to report or to take some recourse? I would like to hear that some portion of that remarkable increase is the result of the good work that you've done. Indeed, you're quite right to say that. We've heard a number of times today that the technologies have been continually improving. So as the technologies improve, also to seek out those types of images on servers, we really see an increase among electronic service providers in the USA, the main actors, Facebook, Google, and so on, that report more images because their detection methods are said to be better than before. In the media, we see that constantly. We encourage people to complain, to come to the police station and to report these cyber incidents, and this is reflected with these partner organizations. So yes, I think that the facility of access, ease of access to the internet will increase the number of reports. More and more users of internet everywhere in the world, including Quebec. We're all, I don't know any home that doesn't have internet. So of course, this is reflected among the users that consume that type of material, and also among the tools that can be used to detect it and to bring that to the police. So of course, there's a lot of awareness building and education that we have to do as parents and as a society and as legislators. Do you have the impression, because we're talking about legislation, so there's C63, which came out recently, which of course I would like to refer to, and that I think we ought to take time to study as quickly as possible. Have you had a chance to take a look at it, and what are your impressions of this bill that is being put forward, aiming to assist you in doing your enforcement work? I think it's a very good start. The solutions will never be perfect because the technology advances rapidly, but it is a good idea. It is a good solution, this legislative bill, in the sense that I think that we have to oblige people that store computer data to know what it is that they're storing. So we can see the principle where you make a correlation with a corner store where you don't allow them to sell guns. Why would you allow someone with a website to store illegal data? So there are robots that exist for that. There is software that exists to facilitate the task for those organizations that store this material without having read the entire bill. Yes, requiring people to report these things and be aware of the content and report it to authorities is necessary, but also tools that are free, that are available for child protection to enable those businesses to use child protection robots and the databases that are categorized by the police to avoid allowing someone to let files out that are already known as child pornography and prevent it from going to a server. When we talk about, well, you said this yourself in an interview, when we talk about consumption, we talk about production. So we need greater supervision of those who store that content. We understand one another on that, and the legislation has to be tough enough and sufficiently serious to discourage them, to dissuade them from doing that. Without that fear, it's just we just give them a little rap on their knuckles and they continue on their way. But it's a question of supply and demand. There's a demand. There's a clientele who is seeking out those types of content. Are we strict enough and are we effective enough when we catch predators or consumers of those types of pornography, particularly and especially child pornography? Are we tough enough and dissuasive enough? What more can we do to dissuade them from wanting to seek those types of content wherever they may find them? You're quite right to mention that it's a principle of supply and demand and consumption. If there's consumption, then there's production. We see that everywhere, whether it's in crime or in legal areas of business. But I think that we do have minimum youth pornography sentences. I think that judges also have considerable latitude in dealing with those situations. We see sentences based on the crime committed and based on aspects of police evidence. What we have to work on, I think, because we often see this in our searches, is the both the families and the suspects minimize the seriousness of this. They say, I didn't touch a child, it's just a picture. Why are you arresting me? Why would I go to court or into prison or have a criminal record? And I think we need to work to change people's mindset and mentality of the accused and of the families. People in the families will tend to protect the person who was arrested, saying that they didn't abuse anyone. However, consuming that image is equivalent to feeding in toward the person that produced it, because if there's a consumer, there has to be a producer at the end of the line. Thank you, Lieutenant Vachon.
Thank you very much. I now go to Ms. Ashton. Nikki, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We know that kids in this country are struggling, and we need to do more. Families are crying out for solutions to keep their kids safe. As legislators, we need to be solution-focused to give kids, parents, and educators the tools they need to combat online harms. We owe it to the young people of this country to do everything we can to keep them safe. We need to keep kids safe, and we need to get it right when it comes to privacy rights. We understand the importance of safeguarding individuals' sensitive information, especially in the digital age where privacy breaches can have severe, and as we've heard from some of our witnesses, sometimes fatal consequences. I'd like to direct my questions to Ms. Todd. And Ms. Todd, I want to thank you very much for appearing before this committee. You are a leading voice in this country, and I want to thank you for sharing obviously a very heartbreaking experience, what your daughter went through, what your family has gone through, and the way in which you've been able to move that into advocacy and social change. I also remember a number of years ago, my former colleague, MP Danny Morin, worked to develop a national bullying prevention strategy, and I remember that he consulted with you on it. I recognize and I want to acknowledge that your leadership work has been ongoing for so many years. That was important work, and the work that you continue to do is so important. I am disappointed that at that time, that national bullying prevention strategy was voted down by the Conservative government that was in power. It's clear we need to do better. I also want to acknowledge that your daughter Amanda's story affected Canadians from coast to coast to coast. It's tragic, and it highlights to what extent we as legislators have failed to keep Canadian young people safe, and the extent to which we have to do much more in that regard. Amanda's story, which you've bravely retold so that no other kid or parent should have to go through what you went through, makes clear how much more work needs to be done. It shouldn't take 12 years following Amanda's bullycide for extradition and a court case. It shouldn't have been the RCMP ignoring a credible tip a year before her death, saying there's nothing that could be done. And in your mind, looking ahead, what should be done to be able to take cases like what your daughter went through and others seriously going forward.
Thank you for your kind words. I'm just going to be frank right here. And so Amanda died in 2012. We are now in 2024. And so we're almost at 12 years. And so I've stood up and I've used my voice and I've been an advocate and I've watched what happened in her life. And I've talked to many, many people and organizations around the world. What you do as politicians and legislators is wonderful. But you put so many roadblocks, and I'm going to be frank, and I'm not saying this to anyone specifically. I'm saying this generally, that so many roadblocks get put up by one political party versus another political party. I have sat on 6 standing committees since 2012 on technology facilitated violence, on gender-based violence, on exploitation against children and young people. Now this one and other ones on intimate images. We talk about, and I could copy paste facts that I talk about: more funding, more legislation, more education, more awareness. Standing committees then come out with a report. We see those reports, but we never know what happens at the end. Do these things really happen? Is there more funding in law enforcement for training of officers and for their knowledge? Are there changes in legislation? Like right now, we look at C63, and I read the news, and I look at the points of view, and I have someone from the Justice Minister's office contacting me regularly because I understand that second reading came up on C63 last Friday. And then you go back to the comments, and all it is infighting, arguing. Will this be passed? Other parties say, no, it shouldn't be passed. We are harming our Canadians and our children and our citizens when things don't get passed. If you look and you do your research, other countries have passed legislation similar to C63. Australia is already in their 3rd or 4th revisions of what they passed years ago. I was in Australia last year and I met the E-Commissioner. I met law enforcement. I was a keynote speaker at one of their major exploitation conferences. And I felt sad because Canada was represented by 2 officers in Ontario, that Canada was so far behind. We are a first world country, and our Canadians deserve to be protected. We need to make sure that everyone works on the legislation, on details. And it's not just about passing laws. There are different silos. There's the education. There's the kids. There's the community. We all need to get involved. And it's not about putting someone in jail because of. It's about finding solutions that work. And as a country, we are not finding those solutions that work right now. We aren't going to find every other predator in the world. Globally right now today, 750,000 predators are online looking for our children. And as my case, Amanda's predator came from the Netherlands. It's not just about one country because the internet is invisible fibers. We know that Nigeria has exploitation rings out there.
Thank you, Nikki. Your time is now over. Thank you. So now I go to a second round. And this round is going to take a total of 25 minutes. I don't know that unless we are really rigid about the timing, we could do a 5-5, 2.5, 2.5, 5-5, or we could shorten that if you like. But if we're going to go with the second round, Ms. Thomas, you're for 5 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Lalonde, I'm just going to come back to you just for, Ms. Savvy, I'm going to come back to you for a moment here. Just with regards to where we left off in terms of platforms, are there legislative changes that could be made in order to better protect children on platforms?
We need to get back to a type of protection that is going to be fit for purpose for the majority of individuals online, including children. So there's always a perfect storm of events with individuals that allow them to be vulnerable to whatever they're looking at. And so the tools that we pick, if we do a device level control that has an age assurance technology, then you're going to get the majority of platforms. If you just cherry pick who you're going to go after, as far as, are you going after a porn site? Are you going after someone like TikTok? What are you doing? If you have a device level control where whenever anybody buys that device in Canada, they have to implement an age assurance technology that you approve as a government. So all these tools get vetted, and then you pick what you think at that moment in time is the one that should be used. You can do that, but you need to have a tool at the device level that hits all of these sites. There's so many different ones where people are finding explicit sexual content all over the place on the regular internet, not on the dark web. They're finding it on the regular internet. I hope that helps answer you.
I think it does to some extent. I guess I'm just curious though, it feels like the responsibility of platforms is somewhat being dismissed by your answer. Not that you're intending to do that, but I'm just wanting to tap into this a little bit further, because should platforms not have a duty of care when it comes to
regulate platforms? Like you're going to pick one and not another?
Why would you have to pick one and not the other?
Well, the problem is there's so many platforms that offer material that is problematic. So how do you decide who you're going to implement the technology with?
I think that's up to legislators to determine.
I think that is a huge challenge for you, a huge challenge. Look at what's going on in Texas and all these other states. They've cherry-picked who they're implementing an age verification technology with, and they've also cherry-picked which technology they're using. And as we've heard today, many of them have not been proven effective, or that they actually do protect and say what they're going to do. So we've got some issues here.
Okay.
That's why we go to device level, as it just gets everything. You can't turn on your phone.
Sorry, I just have to make sure that my colleague gets some time here, so I'm going to switch it over to Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Thomas. I sat and listened to C63 Friday. There was I think a high school class watching in the gallery. And it was kind of interesting because as C63 was debated, I give the teacher a lot of credit. The government had their statement, the opposition had their statements, and one here, there's a trade-off between a guarantee of the security, their security, and the Charter of Rights. And we have seen that in many of these bills, Ms. Selby. So what would your recommendation to those high school students? Many of them are just coming on into the adult world here. And what would your recommendation be on the Charter of Rights that we've seen and the security around sexual exploitation?
Wow, that is an interesting question. And if you go to the United Nations Rights of the Child, I don't know if many of you are aware of this, but there is an optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on a communications procedure that was ratified by 41 nations. And that protocol enables individuals a right to file a complaint with the committee alleging a violation of their rights under the convention, including a failure to protect the child from harmful exposure to pornography and under numerous provisions. So kids can actually file a complaint with the United Nations if they decide, kids or children, if they decide.
Thank you, Dr. Shelby. I think your time is up. I'm going to move to Ms. Talib. Well, actually, not to Mr. Couteau.
We're going to
For 5
split our
minutes,
time, so
Michael?
I'll take, we're going to split our time. So I'll take 2.5 minutes and then pass it over. I just wanted to thank all the witnesses for being here today. You know, this is, of course, a very important issue to all of us in the room here, and I just want to say thank you, especially Carol Todd. Thank you for sharing your story. I wanted to ask a question to Mr. Vachon. Sir, you said that there was a large increase from 2019. I think you said about 300%. You went from 1,000 cases plus to 4,000 cases. Do you have an understanding of why that increase has happened so drastically over the last few years?
Well, as I indicated earlier, I believe that the detection methods by electronic services suppliers are increasing and getting better. And they don't only use AI to a negative end, but it's also used for the right reasons. But that is getting better. So these identification methods by electronic services are improving, but also in schools, youth and adolescents and adults can denounce these crimes either with the police or anonymously, thanks to online access. We have those at the Sûreté de Québec, so we encourage people to report. And I think that police officers have also improved in terms of the support we provide to victims, how we approach them. So as a result of this, all of this will have an effect to increase the number of reports that we receive and that is being processed by our staff through prevention by improving these techniques, and that's the reason.
Because you're on the front line, is there a way in which you take that knowledge you have and transfer it to people who work with young people to put in preventative measures? And I only have about 30 seconds left, and I have to pass it to my colleague. But how do we capture that information and transfer it?
Well, within police organizations, we have prevention teams that we often work with to put together guides. There is a continuum of prevention from year one in Quebec in schools in order to allow for reporting and to identify what is good, what is negative, what can or cannot be done, consent, etc. So we work closely with the prevention team. That is part of my own division. We work hand in hand with them in order to enable them to improve these tools.
Thank you as well to all the witnesses for being here. Monsieur Vachon, je vais aussi vous demander une question.
Mr. Vachon, I'd like to ask you a question. We know that ideally it would be that there would be no explicitly sexual images online at all. But in 2023, we had these provisions to withdraw these images, which require that the material be removed in 24 hours. This is a tool put forward by the Act. So I'm curious to see what you think about these tools and whether there are other tools that might also improve this bill or something that we could give thought to. Yes, it's important to do this. It's key, and to set a timeline is important because often companies, especially if they're not Canadian companies, some won't answer. We see that with the Youth Protection Service. All of their reports on the website don't always receive an answer. So it's important to set a timeline and also to issue fines that will penalize service providers who don't comply with this. In terms of withdrawing online images, the World Police Commission is putting together a data bank that we will have a digital fingerprint, and all of the police community can contribute to this data bank, and that's available both by Ottawa as well as by Youth Protection. And it is this data bank that they use alongside other technologies in order to have the robot sent look through the sites and look for youth pornographic material. So you have to force Canadian companies to use these youth protection services, and forcing them to do that is a great idea in my mind because it allows you to withdraw what's already on the service, but also to avoid from putting other materials on the service. It really cuts it down at the source. It won't be perfect because there will always be images. There are people who produce them, but at the very least, we will remove a good group of them, and there's also support available for victims. But there is no tracking on whether or not this is efficient, unfortunately. That's a good suggestion. So I'd like to know if this image bank is international. I believe you did mention that. Yes, it's international. All of the police departments contribute to that. We use it together.
I now go to Monsieur Champoux. 2.5 minutes, please, Martin.
Merci. 2 minutes et demie, c'est rapide. Je suis content parce que les
Thank you.
réponses.
2.5 minutes is not much time, but thank you for these answers, because those were the answers that I was looking for in this very brief round. And I feel that the message on how important it is to be cautious is simply not always being conveyed. It doesn't always register with young people. I think that you work directly with the consumers of content, but do you have the sense that this message is communicated better and better? Are there things that we can improve on, not only as a parent, but as a society, to ensure that young girls of 12, 13, 14 years of age don't find it cool to have videos taken of them in a video by their boyfriends who can do just about anything with those images? Are we doing things well right now, and what could we do better? Yes, I think we're doing them well right now. I can speak to Quebec. We're doing them well through prevention, as I mentioned it. But increasingly, the police community, well, early in Quebec, we had William Bumbry with his mustache. But right now, the police community is adjusting to its clientele. We're seeing videos that have been done by the Sûreté de Québec on YouTube. We're present on social media, which allows us to reach out to adolescents. We have to continue being visible on social media to send that prevention method, to make it funny, to make it interesting, a little bit lighter than simply saying, don't do this. And we're really working on that level. And in Quebec, we've been doing that. We've developed videos. So prevention is important. As I mentioned, there's a prevention continuum that begins at year 1 in order to hammer that message over and over again, to speak to prevention, but also to speak about the life-lasting consequences, because these last during one's entire lifetime. And that's where we can really reach out to youth. And again, of course, some will always trivialize that. But it's a very profitable industry. There's a lot of demand. There are a lot of customers. And I think you've already answered most of my questions about the coerced, the incentive part of it. So, but who produces this video? Are these gangs? Are these individuals? Is it organized crime? Who's producing these videos? There are a lot of opportunities. This is across the world because you have access to all of these images on internet. It's present all over the world. In Quebec, we're often seeing that done by people who are close to the victims. It could be a father, a brother, an uncle, etc. So these are opportunity crimes. They have access to the victims. Obviously, we have a certain interest vis-a-vis this kind of sexuality, and that's when it's committed. I haven't seen any gangs really. They're more into prostitution. So I take it that it's difficult to identify because this production isn't organized, as you will. This makes your work more difficult because you're dealing with individuals acting solo. Yes, there isn't a pre-established network. Martin?
Des crimes d'opportunité qui sont c'est ça, faits par les.
These are opportunity crimes committed by parents, by uncles, aunts, etc., who are really close to these children, and they commit what is irreparable harm.
Nikki, 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Is Dr. Laidlaw still online, or did
No,
she have to
Dr.
leave?
Laidlaw left at about 6 o'clock.
Okay. Thank you for that. My question is to you, Ms. Todd. You spoke powerfully about the role of education, and I was hoping you could talk a bit more about the role that education can play in keeping children safe. I know in Finland, for example, through its Kiva program, they've done a lot of good work in terms of reducing the social rewards that bullies receive by empowering youth to withhold those rewards, effectively trusting kids to make the right decisions once given the right information, and by explaining to them the harmful effects of cyberbullying and explaining consent. What role do you think empowering youth through education should play?
Thanks, Nikki. And I have to apologize for my passion. My passion comes out. My passion comes out as a parent and also as an educator. And so I work in the third largest school district in British Columbia, and my role as a digital literacy and online safety educator comes into play. And so when going out to schools or talking to parents, I think that who has the ears of children every single day? And so that's educators in the school system. And yes, you know what? We work in the prevention method, and then there's the end result of a crime has been committed, but talking to kids as early as we get them when they're 4 or 5 in preschool, like pre-kindergarten or kindergarten. And there's a time to talk about online safety and social emotional learning and respect and how to interact with others. That is the core, and you build it upon it year after year. Now, working with a variety of teachers all over the place, some teachers aren't getting it. They aren't seeing the importance. They feel that reading, writing, social studies, science is more important than teaching about digital literacy, online safety, and digital citizenship. We need to ensure that this is done in the schools and that we are talking to our kids, and more importantly, that we are talking to parents. Parents out there are unknowing. They're handing devices to their kids as early as 7 and 8 years old, and then complaining that my kid is this happened or whatever. We need to educate, and we need to bring more awareness. And the question is, how are we going to do that? And so that is my role as an educator and as a parent, is how do we get that information out to those who need it? Yes, the tech industry, the governments, we all need to be part of that. But this is like if you want to look at bubbles all around, there are multi things that need to be done in this area.
Thank you. Madam Chair, how long do I have left?
I have 24 seconds.
Okay. Just quickly, we know some important work has happened in BC on this front. The BC NDP government's work around the Intimate Image Protection Act. What lessons do you think, Ms. Todd, could be learned by the federal government when it comes to when it comes to BC?
Well, the BC government's worked really hard on this and ensuring that there is a reporting tool someplace where if it's not criminal, there's the civil area, right? If an image has been shared out in public, what a targeted victim can do. And so there is the tribunal where there is counseling provided. There are mentors to help the person figure out what to do next and the steps in terms of civil restitution. And then there is ways to get the image taken down. And so that is the next step in
Thank you very
that
much.
process.
I'm sorry, Ms. Todd. Yes, Mr. Cotto.
Considering we've got 3.5 minutes left, I'd like to move to adjourn.
Thank you. There's a motion to adjourn, no debate. Is there anyone who does not agree? Good, thank you. Meeting adjourned.
I just said I do not agree.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said I agree. Sorry, I did. Every time I turn this off, it remains on. Look, Miss Thomas, when I turn my speaker off,